everyone, my name is Terri, and welcome to my channel, The Pink Dumbbell Problem, and a new episode in the Friday Fact Day series where I get to talk about my work in fitness, feminism, and philosophy. And today's facts are all about women-only fitness spaces. Are they good? Are they bad? Little from column A, little from column B. There is a lot to unpack here, so let's get right into it. Now, before I get into the present day situation on all of this, I just want to give you a little bit of the historical background. Until the mid-20th century, the idea that women and men could do the same sorts of physical activity, the same sports, the same exercise, that was completely ridiculous to most people. Even today, there's people who insist that that's impossible. And we had for a very long time a concept that we now refer to as separate spheres, in that men had the outdoor public sphere where they went out to work and they ran society, and women had the indoor, the home sphere where they ran the household and raised the children and did all the domestic stuff. This is a very 1950s, 60s kind of thing, right? The Leave It to Beaver kind of vibe. So as the fitness industry evolved, it evolved into separate spheres just like pretty much everything else in our society had done. I've talked a little bit about the historical perspectives on women and physical activity and women's health in the past, but basically a lot of the idea of earlier generations, going back 100 years or so ago, was that women should not be too active because we needed to keep our physical energy and our bodily economy, was the phrase often used, for the only reason really women exist, which is to make more humans, right? To bear children. So as you can imagine, as things like birth control and the ability to choose when you do and do not have a baby, big topic right now, see my last video. So with reproductive choice more available, the idea that women are just walking, breathing, talking baby makers has diminished more and more every decade. Thank goodness. And keep in mind too, childbearing was often an excuse. I mean, there's few things harder on the human body than a pregnancy and childbirth. But the idea was to keep women also physically unfit, keep us less strong than we potentially could be, and also limit things like freedom of movement that came along when the bicycle was invented. As I say in so many videos, see my link down below to the video on bicycle face. One of the few things that has always been acceptable for women to do is dance in various forms, be that social dance or later on, particularly again getting into the 20th century, more artistic forms of dance. Of course, there's always been women throughout history who've played various sports, including team sports, and that has been controlled more or less at different periods of history, depending on what the social mores were of the time. Generally speaking, women who are sporty even today are considered outliers. But socially speaking, dance has been a more acceptable form of physical activity for girls and women for several decades now. Really from the mid-20th century on, it became quite common for girls to be able to access ballet classes where they couldn't necessarily do baseball or hockey. And then there's other feminized sports as well. So not just dance, ballet, and tap dance. There's also things like gymnastics and figure skating that are feminized sports that are acceptable. When the fitness industry came along, the things that men and boys were trained to do became the things that they did in fitness situations, in fitness classes, or in spaces like gyms. And the things women were trained to do became the things that women did. And that's, of course, because fitness, as we know it today, evolved out of sport and dance activities. That's also exactly why, back in the 80s, we were all wearing tights and leotards and leg warmers in aerobics classes. Once again, have a look in the box down below. There's a link there to my video on fitness trends from the 1980s. And yes, I'm wearing leg warmers. So not only did the acceptable activities for women to do evolve into women's fitness, the clothing went with it. That's the history of how we got here. The other thing I want to do before I go on to the pros and cons of women-only fitness spaces today is debunk a huge thing that's still out there. I deal with this at least a couple of times a week at work, and that is that there's a physiological or anatomical reason why we have separate fitness spaces or fitness activities for men versus women. So let me be absolutely perfectly clear about this. I'm going to bust this myth now and for all time. There is absolutely nothing to do with the sex differences for people who are assigned female at birth versus people who are assigned male at birth when it comes to fitness, when it comes to working out. I know there are people out there who Anytime differences of physiology and anatomy come up, they get their knickers in a twist about how men and women are different and we're born different and we can't do the same things. And they use that as an excuse, particularly in sport, and particularly for keeping trans girls and trans women out of sport with cis women. And they will say that, there's differences in skeletal anatomy and lung capacity and yada, yada, yada. There's a whole laundry list of things that people will tell you is very, very strictly different about the sexes. And that's why we can't work out together or do sports together. On the sport thing in particular, and I'm just going to briefly cover this because this really deserves a video of its own. The things that people say make all the difference about who gets to compete with whom in various sports, most of the time, the things on that list are either completely outdated, the people saying them have misunderstood what those things mean and what they represent scientifically with our human bodies, or they don't apply to the particular sport in question. I've seen several of these lists go around, especially last summer when we had a Summer Olympics on. And yeah, you know what? I'll do a video on that some other time when I'm less angry about the bullshit. Aside from the absolute inaccuracy of the things on those lists, I need to reiterate for probably the billionth time in my career as a fitness instructor that fitness and sport are not the same thing. When it comes to working out, there is absolutely nothing that sex or gender has anything to do with. Even if there was a legit argument in a specific sport that people who are AMAB and AFAB shouldn't compete or play together in that sport, that still has absolutely nothing to do with fitness. There's no competition here. There's no medals to win or lose or give back if you're found to have too much testosterone or something in your system. Now, I've covered the difference between sport and fitness in a couple of videos. Of course, links below. Of course they are. They always are. Everything in fitness comes down to the individual, and that comes down to the individual's abilities and interests. And people may say, well, men can bench press more than women. Yeah, but women can still bench press, and how much I bench press versus the guy next to me in the other bench press rack over there, who cares? Doesn't matter. It doesn't mean a thing. Getting back to the point of the video here, women-only fitness spaces, that's entirely about sociology, not physiology. And the sooner people get that clear in their heads and get comfortable with that concept, the better. The pros of having women-only fitness spaces are, first and foremost, 100% safety. Because in co-ed fitness facilities, sometimes, especially if those facilities are not staffed, or maybe they are staffed, but the staff aren't very hip to gender issues, the safety of women in those spaces can be very seriously compromised. And that's safety both as sexual harassment and also various forms of bullying. Thankfully, this has become more and more rare every year. And even since I started in my career 16 years ago, gosh, has it been that long? I see less and less of the negative gender stereotypes and the impact that has on women in co-ed situations every year, which is lovely and very heartwarming. And a lot of the reason why I love my job. I see the benefits of reducing misogyny and sexism in society. I love that. But there's still pockets out there where, again, there's no staff or the staff aren't paying attention to gender dynamics on the floor, and women can end up being sexually harassed, and it's very, very common. In fact, you can Google around and find a video in literally a few seconds of this. Things like interrupting during a workout, telling women how to do a particular exercise. There's so much mansplaining going on. Blocking space so women can't get around it. All of this sort of stuff that men do to try to force women to pay attention to them. A lot of women in exercise spaces feel watched. They feel scrutinized. And this isn't a paranoia thing. This actually comes from the behavior that a lot of us experienced throughout our lives, where everything about our appearance is nitpicked. It was actually one of the number one things that came up when I did the research survey for my master's thesis a few years ago. All of those reasons are absolutely perfectly good reasons for women to eschew co-ed situations and go to women-only fitness spaces. The other reason, of course, is preference. And I mean, a workout's a workout. We all kind of do basically the same things, but how a workout is formatted or packaged, or even how it's advertised, how the language is used, those sorts of things can feel different whether they're based on a co-ed or a men-only or a women-only situation. And similarly, we are seeing popping up in very large cities all across North America, there are LGBTQ plus only fitness spaces. So that can be gyms or boutiques or classes. It's for all the exact same reasons, not having to face harassment, especially where things like change rooms and shower facilities are concerned, not being in a position where you're going to be scrutinized for not being typical for the space. But that brings me to a whole other set of problems about women only or LGBTQ only fitness spaces. The first one is that they are very hard to run as businesses. When you cut down your potential gym membership to only half of the population in a given area, it's much, much harder to make that business function. I know I keep saying this, but this is why we need socialized access to exercise spaces and exercise educators. Your safety in a fitness space, your ability to not be harassed during your workout should not depend on somebody having a successful business model. That leads to another problem, and that is that women-only fitness spaces tend to be underfunded, under-equipped, and understaffed. Quite often, multi-use facilities set aside a women's only space, and it's totally just lip service. And I have seen it far too many times that the equipment in those women-only spaces is hand-me-down gear from the co-ed side. And there might not be staff. And if there is staff, quite often they're not necessarily certified trainers. Or there might be one trainer for the whole gym where you will have several in the other part of the facility. Now, for spaces that are purpose-built to be women only, you don't tend to get that problem. But in city recreation and in multi-use facilities, that is pretty typical. In purpose-built women-only fitness spaces, we also sometimes see fitness equipment that isn't really great. What do I mean by that? You don't see them as much anymore, but for a while, going through the 90s to the early 2000s, there was a number of different chains throughout North America that were women-only fitness spaces. I'm not going to name any of them because some of them are still around in various forms. And just like when I call out people's bad behavior on Twitter, I hope that these folks will come around on this in the future, and I don't want this video to be a sticking point for that. These chains of gyms featured what they often called special workouts just for women. That's always a red flag, by the way. If you see something that's got a special design for women or a special program for women, it's just the same thing as before, but it's got a pink label and a higher price tag smacked on it. At least one of these chains, probably the best known of the bunch, had machines that did not have weight plates on them. They had a hydraulic air canister in them, similar to the one that's like on your computer chair that makes it go up and down. If you've never worked out before and done any kind of resistance training at all, machines like that can actually be good for an absolute beginner. But if you're consistent with your exercise and you're actually developing skills and building some strength as you go, you're going to outgrow machines like that in about 6 to 8 weeks. And of course, these gyms sell you at least a 1-year membership. They also tend to do a circuit. So the actual routine and the order of exercises and things and the time you spend on exercises is very, very, very tightly scripted. And that is so that they can meet the promise of getting you in and out in half an hour because you're a woman with a busy life and you've got kids and a husband to look after and you need to go home and take care of those things. This is so rooted in that 1950s, 1960s belief of separate spheres that I started this video with several minutes ago. The biggest problem with those facilities, though, is that nothing is customizable. It assumes that every woman coming in is a brand new beginner exerciser who's got very little strength and doesn't know how to do anything. The machines were weakened and also really dumbed down. I know I'm kind of crapping on those gyms, and yes, they deserve it. But I do have to give them kudos because, on the other hand, those gyms were the first places that a lot of women, especially of older generations, could access physical activity and resistance training that was socially acceptable and made them feel welcome and not made them feel like they were, butting in on man land. Just to recap quickly, it is hand-me-down, dumbed down, and underfunded and understaffed fitness spaces for women that make the whole women-only fit side of the fitness industry look bad. Do I approve of women-only fitness spaces? Ultimately, yes. There is, again, not physiological reasons, but sociological reasons why those are valuable and why we need them in society. Ultimately, we shouldn't need to have those spaces. It would be lovely if everybody could play together in the gym and share the equipment and not have any bullying. But we're not at that place right now in the world. And unfortunately, that's going to take probably a few more generations to get there. So yes, absolutely, we do need women only and also LGBTQ only spaces in the fitness industry now. Just always remember, this is sociology, not physiology. I repeat that phrase constantly to my student fitness instructors, and they are probably sick of hearing me say it, but it is so important to understand the difference between the two. So men, get out there and do ballet and do some yoga. Women, go and, as I always say, lift heavy. Non-binary folks, you've got the best of both worlds. And hey, everybody, stop monopolizing time on benches while you're checking your phone. I don't care what gender you are. I don't care what sex you are. Nobody likes that behavior. It's got nothing whatsoever to do with gender. It's just something that really annoys me. So thank you so much for watching. I know it's been a few weeks since I've seen you all, and this one was late coming. I had to film this video twice because there was construction noise going on next door to my apartment building. So I thank you for your patience and coming back after this little gap in my work. And share this video with friends and family, and if you're a fitness instructor, share it with clients, because this is still fairly new thinking, even amongst those of us who work in the fitness industry. So get this stuff out there. It'll actually help somebody in real life. And as always, lift heavy, fight the patriarchy, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye.